First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians
That's right.
as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Prime Minister jets off to Washington in the midst of unfriendly opinion polls to hobnob with President Biden. Why do Prime Ministers head to the world stage when their polling is bad, rather than getting on with the job of running Britain? Why on earth would he go to see President Biden anyway? Because he hates Britain. The Duke of Sussex took to the witness box for his second day, giving evidence in the turbulent Mirror Group phone hacking trial. The Duke told the court he would feel some injustice if the accused were found not to have hacked individuals' phones. Should we feel sorry for a troubled middle-aged man? Renowned royal expert Michael Cole brings us the latest. A report today says that British houses are among the smallest in the world, with young people priced off the housing ladder and the properties that are barely big enough to swing a cat in. Why on earth aren't we building more, bigger and more beautiful houses that people want to live in? I'm going to be joined by property expert Russell Quirk to explore this. And nannies, but not the nanny state. It's been revealed that the Deputy PM, Oliver Dowden, led a sinister secret unit to stamp out lockdown dissent during the pandemic. And the thought police are back, this time telling us it's sexist to refer to school teachers as Miss and Sir, along with questionable forces moving to remove schools' rights to select pupils based on religious affiliation. Is the nanny state back? And how far does it need to go before it implodes? My venerable panel will give their invaluable thoughts. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by my panel, the pugnacious former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the erudite political consultant and former Labour councillor, Kevin Craig. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the show. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, what you've all been waiting for, it's time for the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that the Duke of Sussex was at the High Court in London today for his second day giving evidence in his privacy case against Mirror Group newspapers. Prince Harry told the court he believes journalists used unlawful techniques to get stories about him, including placing a tracking device on the car of his ex-girlfriend, Chelsea Davy. He also claimed that they went to extreme lengths to cover up their alleged phone hacking. The publisher denies wrongdoing. The case continues without Prince Harry tomorrow. Now, in the United States, the Prime Minister has visited the Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia today to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. It's ahead of his fourth meeting with the US President at the White House tomorrow. During talks with Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak is expected to reaffirm Western support for Ukraine, as well as addressing the growing threat from China, climate change and the regulation of AI. President Zelensky says he is shocked at what he calls a failure of the United Nations and the International Red Cross to initiate help after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine. The country is now appealing for assistance from other international aid agencies. Tens of thousands of people have had to be evacuated from their homes and businesses in and around Kherson, with rising water levels peaking today. The flooding also endangered vital crops, threatened drinking water supplies, and killed fish and other aquatic life. A Romanian people trafficker has been jailed for his part in an operation to smuggle dozens of Afghan nationals into the UK inside coffin-sized wooden boxes. Adrian Constantin was extradited back to the UK to stand trial after fleeing the country. He was sentenced to 3 years and 2 months in prison at Birmingham Crown Court today after pleading guilty to conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. 35 Afghans, including children as young as 2 and a person with physical disabilities, were all screwed into purpose-built hides and smuggled into the UK in the back of vans. And lastly, Pope Francis is recovering from a 3-hour-long operation on an abdominal hernia. The Vatican said there were no complications during surgery and the pontiff will stay in hospital for several days to recuperate. The 86-year-old suffered a number of medical setbacks recently, spending 5 days in hospital in March with a lung infection and 2 years ago having surgery on his intestine. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Is it a mistake for the Prime Minister to go abroad when the polls are bad? It often happens. But is it wise when there's need to take charge of the domestic agenda? There is, after all, plenty to do. We are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, the small boat crossings, there's a lack of energy security, energy prices have risen, crime is ravaging our cities. So why isn't the Prime Minister here focusing on the domestic issues rather than making friends with a president who doesn't actually like the UK in the first place? When you have a 51% disapproval rating, it may be tempting to hobnob with the great and the good globally, the red carpet, the mass bands, the luxury of Blair House, which is where the president puts up his most favoured guests, won't win any votes in the United Kingdom. But also, why go and see Biden? Because we know Biden is unsympathetic to us. He doesn't like the UK. Unlike most Americans. Most Americans are extremely friendly. Indeed, my late grandmother was an American who married an Englishman, so she must have liked the English quite a lot, or we hope she did. Last month, President Biden said his trip to Ireland was to stop Britain, if you'll forgive the foul language, screwing around over the Belfast Agreement, and so that Northern Ireland didn't walk away from their commitments. Previously, it was reported that he said he hates the English, and he allegedly recalled his aunt telling him when he was young, words he clearly took to heart. Your father's not a bad man, he's just English. But actions speak louder than words. In the 1980s, he voted against the extradition treaty in 1985 when IRA terrorists were remaining in the USA. He and a number of other senators tried to block a treaty that would have made it easier to prosecute them in the UK. Indeed, Mr. Biden has even been pictured grinning with convicted IRA terrorist Rita O'Hare, along with the champion of Britain-hating Gerry Adams. Biden, unfortunately, is the biggest threat to the special relationship since Sir Winston Churchill coined the phrase in 1944. Unlike Margaret Thatcher and President Reagan, mutual respect, a shared vision of freedom, a personal compatibility is nowhere to be seen. And that comes back to the fundamental point. Elections are won and lost on domestic policy. The PM's in tray is overflowing. He needs to be at home, accountable to Parliament. He missed Prime Minister's questions today. Why didn't he go abroad in the parliamentary recess last week? We need him here. We need decisions to be made. We need good government. We don't need hobnobbing with the great and the good abroad. But of course, I want to know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. And I'm now going to hear from my venerable panel, the pugnacious former editor of The Sun and the erudite political consultant. I'm going to go to the erudite one first. Kevin, isn't this what Prime Ministers always do? Things difficult at home. They think they'll go onto the world stage, it'll make them look big and important back at home, but actually it doesn't butter any parsnips.
Well, it might not butter any parsnips, Jacob. I'm worried about your chances of getting back into government if you carry on like this. You know, Rishi's going to watch this and he's going to think, you know, Jacob's outside the tent. But anyway...
I'm giving him helpful advice. Stay at home and deal with the problems.
Putting that to one side, and I think there's a debate to be had about Joe Biden. I suspect both of you will agree with each other and I'll disagree with you. I don't think he hates the UK. I think he's proud of his Irish roots. But your question is a good one. Why is the Prime Minister in America? Well, they're our biggest trading partner, and there are very big issues at play in terms of artificial intelligence, national security. And let GB News have a broadcasting first, right? Rishi Sunak has appointed probably a friend of yours, the Boris Johnson supporting Conor Burns, as his new envoy to the states of the United States to try and get trade deals going. And I suspect your constituents probably want the Prime Minister to be trying to go to America, create jobs, and they are our closest ally and friend, I suggest. And it's kind of the Prime Minister's job. You can do without him for a bit.
Well, I think the question about... I think everybody in the UK, or most people in the UK, with the exception of the extremes of your own background, are in favour of good relationships with the United States.
Yeah. Last reference?
Well, to the left of your party, right, would do almost anything to try and destroy that. There isn't a special relationship. We're a small country, and we have a common language which doesn't actually unite us, is the truth. But the reality of it all is that he has to go there and he has to bow and scrape. Previously, what used to happen was at least whoever was the American president gave some indication that either he quite liked the old country or something like that. What happened in that last Irish trip by Biden was an absolute disgrace. First of all, he gives about 20 minutes and not even a cup of tea to Sunak, and then spends 3 days with Southern Ireland. Southern Ireland are not great friends of the UK. OK?
They're great friends of the
They are not great friends of the UK. They have never...
Ireland and Britain are increasingly good friends. There's a great relationship
There has been no relationship with Southern Ireland, as far as I can see, for the last 50 years.
I'm all in favour of the special relationship in principle, but we mustn't overstate it, and America doesn't take it that seriously. Do you remember when Gordon Brown had to meet, was it Obama, in a kitchen?
Yeah.
And the British Prime Minister get obsessed by FaceTime with the US President, when what we actually need is an answer on small boats. We need to hold the Bank of England to account for failing on inflation. There's so much happening domestically.
I mean, it's a funny angle you come at this with, I guess. I mean, I think you know, Joe Biden went to the Republic of Ireland because his roots are Irish, right? And I mean, there's so many bodies joining our country and the Irish. You know, lots of work going on to try and make the peace agreement work. And you know, it's regrettable that people got offended by Joe Biden's last visit. But
well, he then said he had to go to stop the British misbehaving, to bully us.
Yeah, no,
I mean, he
crossed the road for a fight because having lived in the United States, I know this. Everybody is Irish, and there are lots of votes in it. Therefore, he can be as vile as he likes towards us.
Vile's a bit strong, Kelvin.
Well,
Biden has traded off a sort of green myth throughout his political career that he wants to portray himself as very, very Irish and therefore anti the British. And his voting in the Senate in the 1980s absolutely is part of this, to obstruct, to use the filibuster mechanism to stop an extradition treaty, because he thought that appealed to his voting base.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking now about Irish history, and then you started talking about the US president, and I think that for me, and I think, you know, and today is a day where we're all thinking about what can we do to help you out with your constituents, given that polling that's out, right? And the Prime Minister is over there trying to, you know, and I'm not an advocate of his, because I think, you know, your party's done a terrible job, as one personal view, but that is the job of our Prime Minister. Go there and work with whoever the Prime Minister is. Even Theresa May had to go and, well, I don't know what she shook with Donald Trump, but you have to go and do it. It's part of the gig, right?
I suspect that our country... you could actually, I'm surprised you don't argue this, that Sunak should actually stay here in order to correct some of the mistakes that the Conservatives have made, which I thought much more logical argument.
Isn't it what Prime Ministers do when things aren't going well at home? Because actually this is, about the third Prime Ministerial trip abroad in a fairly short number of weeks that Margaret Thatcher did.
Do you know the other thing he's doing? Do you remember? He continued to hold a green card, right? A green card. That's a very valuable piece of paper, by the way, or a very valuable stamp, right, when he was actually the Chancellor of our country. And the idea that... So OK, my bet is, where does he see his future? Like a lot of people in the UK, immediately Labour get in with a landslide. They see their future. They will go west, young man, or in my case, old man, right? Go west, old man. And I suspect that what he's doing is getting himself in some kind of shape with the financial community in the United States.
I think that's very cynical. I don't think he's likely to do that. I think Rishi Sunak is as patriotic as any of us are.
I'm not saying he's not patriotic.
That's unfair.
That's it.
More of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know it.
I will defend him. I will defend him when I think what he's doing is reasonable. But it's this trend of Prime Ministers to go abroad when things are tough at home, and it's not in their interest. Margaret Thatcher at the Opera in France the night before she's voted out. Tony Blair becomes a great globetrotter as he becomes more unpopular in the UK. I mentioned Gordon Brown in the kitchen with Obama. It's just what Prime Ministers do, and they forget. Voters don't vote on foreign affairs. They vote on their mortgage.
Well, indeed they do. And, you know, what a great time to be talking about mortgages, Jacob.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not been going that well. And maybe that is one of the reasons why he's in America, because no one there is going to say to him, under your watch, my friend.
That's the point. Now, that very interesting point being made there. So Labour, when they get to power, they're going to reduce...
Kelvin,
are going to reduce interest rates.
Well, excellent. Labour, when it gets into power, you heard it here first, is going to abolish independence of the Bank of England. As the Bank of England has made such a bad job of it, perhaps Labour couldn't do worse. Anyway, remember, I want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, it's the Duke of Sussex's second day in court. Will his only visits to Britain from now on be to attack the freedom of the press? And ought we to feel sorry for a troubled middle-aged man?
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've kindly been getting in touch with your thoughts. Graham. I think Rishi is totally right to go abroad, despite the political climate at home. No one can deny that he's not working hard on issues at home. At the same time, he is flying the flag abroad. Give the guy a break. Graham doesn't give his address as number 10 Downing Street, but perhaps he is from the press office there. It's loyal stuff. Gwyn, the PM should be here sorting out the mess and convincing the public that he is electable at the next election, not acting. So at least somebody's on my side. And Rod is even more cynical than Kelvin. Rishi is simply cashing in his air miles before Starmer takes off at the next election. I don't think the Prime Minister needs air miles, but we'll leave that to one side. It's His Royal Highness, the Duke of Sussex's second day in court, giving evidence against Mirror Group newspapers, who he is accused of hacking his phone over a decade ago. Mirror Group newspapers deny the allegations. In his cross-examination, Sussex said he may have been hacked every day for over 15 years and that he would feel injustice if his claims weren't accepted by the court. Mirror Group newspapers does not have a single item of call datum between Harry's phone and any Mirror Group journalist. What kind of justice is he hoping to conjure from pursuing these claims? For some, this is the latest chapter in a royal tragedy. Sussex was once his brother's right-hand man and the nation's lovable rogue, the younger sibling. Now he lives a life of litigation along with his wife, the Duchess, and they are plaintiffs in no less than 7 cases against the British media. Seems the only time His Royal Highness will set foot in this sceptred isle will be for royal ceremonies he can't get out of, or to give evidence against its press in court. We've got with us Michael Cole, the unflappable Michael Cole, to discuss this, along with my brilliant panel, Kelvin Mackenzie and Kevin Craig, who you know. Michael, is this all rather sad? Is he a troubled middle-aged man who has decided to wage war on the press without really much evidence?
That would be the conclusion I would draw. To rework an old wartime poster, was his journey really necessary? And has it been successful? Well, it certainly hasn't been successful. I have had the duty of reading through every syllable of the transcript of this case, and I was looking for the smoking gun. Well, there's not a smoking gun. I don't even think there's a gun, because in the 33 cases that he's cited, where he's alleging a very serious allegation that people at the Daily Mirror Group, which goes back 100 years, a very respectable newspaper group.
Well, it was owned by Robert Maxwell, so it wasn't that respectable.
But it had a great history going back to the 19th century, and it's done great work over the years for the royal family. I can only just, for this country, I think of that wonderful cartoon after the war where a Tommy, battle-stained, goes to the politicians and gives him the wreath of victory and says, "Don't lose it again." That was a great cartoon. And what it did do over the years, it's been a champion of the working class. And I don't think we should disrespect that. And what he's been saying in great detail, that he's hurt. His hurt is raw and it's real. His belief is profound. And his anger is immense. But he has not been able to prove that senior people, editors, maybe proprietors, at the Daily Mirror have procured 33 articles by illicit, illegal means. There was a case at the end of the hearing today, at the end of his evidence, a perfect case, a perfect examination. He said that he found on the underside of his girlfriend, Chelsea Davies' car, a tracker, and he found another one on the car of a friend of his, Marco, who was a good friend of his. And he named the person who he said put it there. I'm not going to name him because I don't know whether he did or he didn't. It was privileged information, but I'm not going to name him. But there was no attempt, either by him or by his counsel, to link that act, an illicit act, an illegal act, a disreputable act, to anybody at the Daily Mirror. These trials turn on proof, not assertion, not allegation, not hurt feelings.
It's proof of balanced probabilities rather than reasonable doubt. It's the civil proof rather than the criminal proof. But, Kevin, is it fair both to hope that he doesn't succeed, because I think a free press is so fundamentally important and that the attack on the free press is very worrying, but equally to feel a great deal of sympathy for him, that he's clearly troubled. He's got a lot of pent-up anger with the way he's been treated by the press over the years, some of which is perfectly reasonable, but doesn't make the press criminal and doesn't mean the press should be controlled.
No, and I think most of us here and most people watching believe in a free press. I think it's quite important in our country to hold people to account. I mean, I'm sad about it because Harry was, as a young man, he risked his life for our country, and he did a huge amount of work for military charities where I was involved with them, and they loved what he did. This case, you know, as you heard from a preeminent expert, it depends on the detail. We, in my day-to-day life, don't advise clients to go to court unless they're sure of winning. And this is interesting for me because there's a big machine behind him, and somebody sat in a room beforehand and thought, well, we must think we're going to win. He feels, out of principle, and I have to imagine that, and that's why he's doing it, the whole thing is,
but do you think that people with other, from what you're saying, other axes to grind,
Yeah.
people who dislike the free press are actually manipulating him as the front man, in a sense the fall guy, for their aims to hold
I
the
don't
press?
think so, Jacob. I don't think so. I think this is one person's mission.
Kelvin, in the freewheeling days of the 1980s, you printed stories about everybody. But lots of the celebrities you printed stories about cooperated with you, didn't they? They wanted to be.
Well, they were buttering their toast both sides, so we used to both pay them, then they'd sue us. It was fantastic. However, in this particular case, honestly, it's catastrophic for Harry. I have absolutely no doubt he's going to lose this. And not only that, remember, he's got the Sun and the Mail coming up round the corner. They will be tremendously buoyed up. I can't understand why is this humiliation in his interests? Because he will have seen that the evidence, every single case, there is an answer to why it probably wasn't hacked by the Mirror Group. And they have paid out on the one occasion when they said it's fair enough. So why does he want to bring this on himself? I wonder how well he is.
Well, is it a bigger campaign that he thinks that if he wins in the court of public opinion, that the people think that he's been unfairly treated over the whole of his life, that they will then move in a way that leads to press regulation. He's had a go at the government. He doesn't think this government's any good. And it's not really about winning in court. It's about the court of public opinion. But he doesn't seem to be winning there either at the moment.
No. But this is for that particular idea and policy. This is a disaster because I say he's going to lose. He then gets painted as some nutbalm living in California, living a fantastic life, and coming over here every so often to give us a good kicking for being English. So there is nothing but disaster. And what I can't understand, one of the things that he objects to is being painted as dim and as a thicko. He actually used the expression thicko, right? What will emerge in this is that at some stage he was dim. Surely his own side did not say to him, you are going to win this.
Can I
because
ask
they
a
know.
question then? Is it possible, though, that the proceedings will find that he was subject to phone hacking?
Well, the judge is going to have to... First of all, he will be extremely and scrupulously fair to the Prince. Absolutely. But he can only decide this on the evidence, on the proof that's presented to him. And I've listened to this. And what is staggering is that he's the plaintiff. He's the guy who's brought this case. And he's come into court without anything which I think could be dignified with the term of proof. It's extraordinary that it should be like this. He was asked by his barrister at the end of his cross-examination and re-examination after the cross-examination. He was asked by his own barrister, how is it, how did you feel about giving evidence? And he became very emotional. He became very choked up. And there's no doubt, for more than 8 hours, it's been an ordeal, a different sort of ordeal than sitting in the front seat of an Apache attack helicopter, but an ordeal. And he's brought that on himself. And, of course, isn't it ironic? His whole life, he's hated publicity. He's hated photographers. And what was outside the court? The whole Nikon choir was there taking his picture.
He has maximised the publicity. As so often, the late Queen was right. Never complain and never explain. But thank you to my panel and the royal expert, Michael Cole. Remember, I want to hear your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. And are the British house prices about to collapse? Figures show that UK house prices have experienced a fall for the first time in a decade. Are the British people getting enough space in their homes? Reports say British homes are among the smallest in the world. We will be examining this with property expert Russell Quirk. But first, a preview of what's coming up with Professor Dan Wootton's must-watch show on Prince Harry's explosive second day in the High Court.
Coming up, brace yourself for day 2 of Harry's High Court testimony as we continue our exclusive coverage of his assault on the British Free Press. Expect more bombshells like this using our Harry.
The phrase two-faced may have come from a voicemail. That's how I've always seen him. I've never smoked a joint in that pub or in my father's house.
So join me, Samantha Markle, Lady Colin Campbell and Jim Davidson for Harry's Evidence, The Verdict, Day 2, coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m, only on GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Gail says, thank you, Gail, I like this comment. Great to hear some calm, sensible conversations from you and your guests. Well, that's what we aim for. And Maureen, I feel sorry for Harry. He is a sad, disillusioned man who has received poor advice. It's time to move on, Harry, but I fear, because he is royal, they will side with him. Well, we'll have to wait and see. UK house prices have recorded their first year-on-year fall for over a decade, says the Halifax, in response to high rising mortgage rates, cost of living crisis and economic uncertainty. On average, houses are worth 1% less than they were this time last year, following an annual decline in house prices for the first time since 2012. Following the Bank of England's lamentable failure to control inflation, there has been a large rise in interest rates and major concerns from the public across the property market. The expectation among most economists is that come the end of 2023, the peak trough drop in house prices could be close to 10%. But also, recent analysis shows that British homes are not very good value because they're quite expensive, but they're small. The British public were found to be paying more and getting less space, with average homes equating to 818 square feet, but costing £351 for each of those square feet. And this is obviously affected by mass migration, which has led to an increase in demand, which has meant that supply hasn't been able to keep up, and planning difficulties have often led to smaller houses. And the question is, why aren't we doing more about this, freeing up the planning and building houses that people actually want, rather than finding that only behind us in house price and house sizes are the Chinese, the Russians and the Indians, but way ahead are Denmark, let alone the Australians and the Americans. Anyway, joining me now to discuss the latest on the housing market is the property expert and political commentator, Russell Kirk. Russell, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure.
You're pretty confident we're not going to face a house price crash.
Well, there's been lots of doomsters, lots of so-called experts, including the Bank of England and Capital Economics and goodness knows who else, jumping on this bandwagon, which is to say that there will be a crash. If we look back in history, though, Jacob, of course, those same people have been forecasting a crash since way before Brexit. So Mark Carney famously and George Osborne both said back in 2013-14 that if we Brexited, hard Brexited, and then, of course, let alone pandemic and so on, that we would see a property price crash. The reality is that actually, even during the pandemic, property prices increased by about 25%. So despite the fact that the news today from the Halifax is such that house prices have dropped by a whopping, a huge 1% year on year, that's hardly a crash, and I don't believe we're going to see one.
But isn't it more serious than 1%, because inflation's running at nearly 10%, so you're talking about in real terms.
Yes, but inflation, of course, applies to everything, doesn't it? It's a relative thing.
But in a funny way, isn't that quite helpful? Because it brings houses into greater affordability without moving people into negative equity, because if inflation eats up a bit of the house value, nobody really notices.
Yeah, there's an argument because, in real terms, wages now are increasing by about 6 or 7% per annum, that obviously that is over and above house price inflation, so therefore that's starting to kind of re-equalise the balance, I suppose. But the reality is that the UK property market, despite those two doomsayers, has been remarkably resilient for a number of reasons, I think. I mean, first of all, because, of course, you only sell your property very periodically. So, therefore, even if house prices are under pressure or your mortgage payments are under pressure, you don't realise that until you actually decide to move. And, of course, what we've seen over the last 12 months or so is that transactions have dropped significantly. So people simply aren't selling, so they're not realising that loss. But I think we understate the resilience of homeowners and home buyers. We also forget, for instance, that some years ago, the government of the day introduced the mortgage review, whereby if you now take out a mortgage, you have to be stress tested to a much higher rate than existed at the time. And I think, look, as a culture, we are very much an aspirational home-owning nation. And therefore, for those doomsayers, those that I think are purposely trying to talk the market down, maybe the odd Remainer here and there, Jacob, dare I venture, and those on the left that I think actually want to see bad news because it suits them in terms of their political views, they today, frankly, based on the fact that house prices have only dropped 1%, they were flat month on month, so we are not seeing a crash. Those so-called experts are wrong, and frankly, this morning must have been crying in their cornflakes, I suspect.
Because it was only 1%. But there is then the issue of development and whether we're building enough houses, and whether that isn't one of the main reasons it's so difficult for people to get on the property ladder, because you go back to the 1990s, people were buying houses in their 20s, they're now nearly 40 before they're becoming first-time buyers.
Yes.
And the lack of supply is an important part of that, combined with the extra demand from migration.
It is. Well, let's go back to Macmillan. I mean, way back, Macmillan, in his day, was building 300,000 homes a year. A large proportion of those were council houses at the time, social housing. What we've now seen, because the property market has softened, we're seeing a lot of developers deciding not to build right now. And no disrespect to your colleagues in the Conservative Party, the likes of Theresa Villiers does not help, where she gathers together 60 backbench MPs, to put Rishi Sunak under pressure to scrap house building targets, but also effectively to join with NIMBYs in their own constituencies to try and stop major house building. That simply can't be allowed to continue.
And this is part of the reason why properties are so small, because when you get a planning permission, you want to squeeze in as much as you possibly can because you're worried about where the next one will come from.
Yes.
And actually, the Macmillan houses were much bigger than 800 and some odd square feet,
yes,
and often had gardens, particularly the council houses, which is actually what people want. And we need to get to a system that builds what people want rather than what state planners think's good for them.
We do, but also we need to take the pure politics out of planning at council level. Councillors that have got slim margins, particularly when things nationally dictate that they might lose their seats, as soon as they get a vocal minority in their patch that are concerned about 20 properties being built at the end of their road, for instance, of course, those councillors then vote against those planning applications, not because there's merit in that objection, but because they're worried about losing their seats. The other problem, I think, is this fixation we have with the green belt, which, of course, now is about 75 years old, has never been reformed, and the fact that despite the fact that large swathes of the UK are greenbelt, we don't seem to want to reclassify, dare I say, build on just a little bit of it, just a bit.
And a lot of the greenbelt isn't actually very attractive. A lot of it's brownfield sites, which you're still not allowed to build on because it's classified as greenbelt.
Yes, I'm afraid the one thing, and probably the only thing that I agree with Keir Starmer on right now.
Well, that's a shocker. Well, there we have it, that Russell is actually supporting Keir Starmer on one thing. But thank you very much for joining me. Coming up, not the Duke of Sussex, but the Prince of Bossy Boots. Why did Oliver Dowden lead a sinister secret propaganda unit during COVID?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Jenny, we need to stop building in brick and block and move to timber frame that can be factory produced and built in days. And Peter sends a message from Somerset, which is always highly regarded on this programme. The now extinct Sedgemoor District Council Planning Committee passed houses which should have had a minimum size of 70 square metres, which is about 700 square feet, it's roughly 10, as being OK at 51 square metres, 510 square feet, roughly, which is tiny, it's hardly a studio. Unfortunately, the government's own standards, only recommendations, they should be made compulsory. I think in Australia they have about 2,500 square feet, which is, I think, much more comfortable, but they do have a fair old amount of space in Australia. But now, an update on the latest governmental interventions to protect you from yourself. It's been uncovered that the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, led a secret unit to stamp out lockdown dissent during the pandemic. British citizens, well-respected scientists and campaigners all had their posts covertly monitored by the Counter-Disinformation Unit. In an exemplary case of liberal tolerance, the United Nations has called for a ban on religion being used to select pupils in England. What business is it of theirs, I cannot think. Most faith schools in England qualify for exemptions from the 2010 Equality Act, which enables them to prioritise children from families who share their faith if they are oversubscribed. And all this is going on while teachers at a leading sixth form will no longer answer to Sir and Miss because they're deeply unequal, according to the school's executive principal, which may in old money be a headmaster. Perhaps they could adopt Eton's approach, which was observed when I was there and still is, and address their schoolmistresses as ma'am, which may be fairer if you're calling the schoolmasters sir. And finally, according to the government's spending watchdog, the speed at which cycle lanes and low-traffic neighbourhoods were delivered during the pandemic led to some poorly designed schemes that may have had the opposite of the desired effect and actually discouraged cycling. There is, as many of you will know, a notorious one in my own constituency in Keynsham, where a number of constituents have been injured. Crackpot scheme, typically introduced by the Lib Dem Council, has actually led to a rise in accidents. So the nanny state doesn't seem to be as efficient as nannies historically are. So let's turn to my brilliant panel, Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun, and Labour councillor Kevin Craig. Kelvin, nanny state getting it wrong, bungling, but this unit...
Yes, no, the unit was quite wrong. Of course, Dowden was in your game, wasn't he? He was a PR, so God knows why we would want our nation led by a PR. But
told David Cameron that when he was Prime Minister, did you?
Yeah, I had exactly the same view, actually.
Yeah.
But I think that the issue on the Dowden thing, it was quite wrong. In social media, the quickest way under the old ownership of Twitter to get banned was simply to suggest that either the lockdown was completely inappropriate and that people were actually being killed by vaccines and the like, right? Bang, that was... Fortunately, under the new ownership, where we haven't got COVID, you can say what you damn well like. The idea that the government, when we're up to our necks in God knows what else, should decide that a small percentage of the vast debate should be curtailed is quite wrong. The fact that some people, I think, are mad to think in that way, there are a lot of mad people out there. They are entitled to have their mad say.
You see, I agree with that. I think if you try and stop people saying things, you then put fuel on their conspiracy theorist fires and they become more determined that it's true and they say, no, people are trying to stop me and they're only trying to stop me because we found something out. And having these sorts of units is such a mistake because it doesn't work. It ends up being counterproductive.
The revelation of this unit was very interesting, I think. Its name itself gives rise to conspiracy theories. But, I mean, the alternative viewpoint to you two gentlemen is that what Oliver Dowden was overseeing was an attempt just to monitor public discourse at a time of national emergency. And as I saw, just one thing to add, the senior civil servant has denied the Permanent Secretary that any individual's posts were monitored and stuff.
But they were then communicating with Twitter and so on to try and get these...
They had meetings at a high level with social media people. I don't know whether you've ever tried to access anybody in social...
Monitoring and answering is perfectly reasonable to say, look, this story's been put out.
It's wrong.
It is not true. It's perfectly reasonable. To then go a step further and say to social media companies, you shouldn't allow this on or you should take it down, seems to me to be the step too far.
Do you think anything should be allowed on social media at all? Is there? I mean,
I think when you have a debate... Look, I agree with the point you're making, right? But, however, in relation to COVID, people were frightened. People had their own thought processes about viruses of various kind. They were surely entitled to actually say it on Twitter or Facebook, but however they weren't allowed to say it because the government were having meetings at this high level saying it is unhelpful to our message if you allow these counter messages to come in.
Actually, it's quite helpful sometimes hearing the other argument. I got lots of correspondence from a relatively small number of constituents against the vaccine, and I therefore took the trouble to look into detail as to how safe the vaccine was, at which point I was completely reassured that the vaccine was safe. I was much more confident about it because I'd had people challenging me. Whereas beforehand I'd just assumed it was fine, but actually the data are so robust that the vaccine really worked and was safe.
I mean, look, my view would be that in that national emergency, I'm going to be generous to the government, which is to say that the overriding need and desire on their part was to save as many lives as possible. And, I maintain the view that without the vaccination programme, we wouldn't all be sitting here tonight.
Well, I think it was very important.
But that wasn't the argument, was it? They were clearly monitoring what was going on, and then they were going to the social media czars and saying, look, this is dangerous to our message because we want people to have the...
Opposing lockdown is much more marginal because actually we now know that lockdown wasn't necessarily as good as we were told it was.
That's highly contentious and one for another night. I would disagree with you, and
But it's a matter for debate.
It is a matter
and
for
therefore
debate,
government trying to restrain the debate, because you may be right, but it's something that should be debated openly, and the government should never have tried to close that particular argument down.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be generous, I think it was a desire in an emergency to maximise the number of people who took the advice to get the vaccine. I don't take issue with anybody who's had an adverse reaction. My own partner, she had one, and I understand why some people are...
How serious was your...
Oh, 6 to 12-month muscle, issue.
Right.
At the same time, I know lots of people whose lives were saved by the vaccine, and conversely, it killed my father.
So I now will not have the booster because of the reaction I had last time.
And that's absolutely right.
And that's a fair choice.
Yeah. So that's very interesting, isn't it? There's three of us here, and one who's had it. The partners had it. I mean, this is quite a serious debate.
But millions who also were fine with it.
That's right. The numbers are overwhelmingly in favour of the vaccine. But the nanny state in other areas. First of all, they want to control our conversations. I mean, some of these stories are pretty silly, but why do you think schoolmaster says you can't call teachers sir? Isn't it just respect and discipline, the sort of thing you want in the school?
Do you know what? On that, I'm not wholly hostile to this. I mean, the idea of actually saying we're going to ban it
after all these years
is ridiculous. However, what they have said, you are going to refer to somebody as Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg, right, or Mr. Mackenzie or Mr. Kevin. It's not as though they are abandoning the idea that there is a structure of a teacher up there and a pupil down there. So I don't feel quite so bad about it. I don't know whether it has to be... The funny thing about it is, the argument against it is that it is a story. Right? And if it's a story, it must be unusual. And I will be very interested to see whether this becomes the norm. No Secretary of State for Education is going to announce that this is a good idea. Right?
Well, the Let's
just see what happens.
Any notice if he did.
Let's just see what happens. And if one particular school wants to do it, then let's see how the pupils and the teachers react to it.
All right, and the psychopaths, or the psychopaths, they've finally been shown up to be as dangerous as many people thought they were. Terrible waste of money. Let's support the motorists.
Well, support the motorists, but support cyclists. And I think there is an interesting question here about that when you say nanny state, right? And let's avoid any jokes about nannies. Okay?
I'm quite used to them.
No, I know. So let's avoid them. So nanny state. And I think there's an argument that the state of our country, we've never needed more state interaction to get us back on our feet. And I think that, you see that, but there's good debate and disagreement around that, because I think in terms of, what government needs to do to get this country back on its feet is a big job.
Well, the good news is I know Nanny's watching, and I will find out when I get home whether she agrees with you or she agrees with me. I think I'm on pretty safe territory, aren't I, Nanny? Anyway, that's all from me. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wotton. What scandals have you got in store tonight, Dan?
Your most important viewer, Jacob. But look, it is day 2 of Harry's evidence. The verdict. We are continuing our incredible recreation of what went on inside that courtroom. Plus, we'll have the best analysis with Lady Colin Campbell, Samantha Markle, Lady Victoria Harvey and Angela Levin. This was not a good day for Prince Harry, as you pointed out earlier, Jacob. So we've got a whole load of coverage you won't see anywhere else.
Well, it'll be really exciting. It was so well done last night. I can't wait to see it. And the commentators you've got are the best informed anyone can find. But that's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back on the morrow at 8 o'clock. It's bound to be sunny in Somerset. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this, as you know, has been State of the Nation.
Good evening. Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Changes are on the way, but tomorrow is going to be more of the same. It starts a bit dull and eventually it turns sunny for most, with the eastern side again likely to keep a lot of cloud. Down to the southwest, low pressure is brewing. That will create a bit of a change in the outlook. But for, as I say, tonight and tomorrow, it's more of the same. So the cloud that's been lurking in the east just drifts back further inland as we go through the night. So a fine warm evening for many, but the cloudy and cooler conditions in the east spread back to most areas through the night. Temperatures holding up at 8 to 10 Celsius. A bit warmer than that in the southwest, where it's going to get quite windy, actually. A blustery night across the far southwest of England and parts of the south coast of Wales as well. It will be windy windy here too during Thursday. For most, it's a grey start tomorrow, but the clouds should break up in most locations from mid-morning onwards. Again, parts of the east coast looking fairly glum, much of northern Scotland as well. Perhaps a sunnier day across parts of East Anglia. Maybe a touch warmer, although there will still be that cold wind coming in from the North Sea. Highest temperatures down to the southwest could get up to 25 degrees come Thursday afternoon. But down to the southwest, as well as the winds picking up, the cloud increasing. And look at this. Haven't seen much of this recently. Rain in the form of showers, which are more likely during Friday in the southwest. Hit and miss, not everywhere seeing them, but there will be some around. Elsewhere on Friday, it's a similar story. Starts a bit drab. East coast stays cool and quite murky, but for many, it will be another sunny day on Friday. And again, west will be best for those temperatures, getting into the low, maybe mid-20s, but the humidity will start to rise in the southwest with the threat of those showers coming along. An increasing risk of seeing those showers spread northwards during the weekend. It's going to turn a bit hotter. Humidity will rise with an increasing chance of some showers.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB